All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, we want to send all of you our thank you for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak, but we do this because we love this, as we will continue to share our passions with you all as we build our listening army to take over the world. Yes, we are right back with another one. We about to go upside your head with another Chin Check Radio reverie. Fantasy warfare. If you look at the two fighters on your screen right now, and this came from a conversation on Twitter, who would win between Riddick, Big Daddy Bowe, and Iron Mike Tyson? Again, two guys who fought in the same weight class, same era, and for some reason did not step into the ring. So you know we're gonna have to discuss why the fight didn't happen, who would win if both men fought. We'll go ahead and start with the great Iron Mike Tyson, who made our Chin Check Radio fighters of all time that we grew up watching. He was in the honorable mention category. Mike Tyson fought at heavyweight, standing at a height of 5 feet 10 inches with a 71-inch reach. 58 total fights, 50 wins, 44 big wins by knockout, 6 losses, and 2 no contests. We'll just pick up Mike Tyson's career when he beat Trevor Burbank in November of 1986 by TKO of the second round, which is one of the funniest knockouts you ever see, where a man was knocked down 3 times from the same punch. Well, at the age of 20, became the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, and Mike won the WBC heavyweight champion at that time. March of 1987, a unanimous decision victory over James Bone Crusher Smith, winning the WBA heavyweight title of the world. In August of 1987, a unanimous decision victory over Tony TNT Tucker to win the IBF heavyweight champion. So now at this point, Mike Tyson holds the WBC, the WBA, and the IBF heavyweight championship. In January of 1988, a TKO in the 4th round against the former longtime champion of the 1980s, Larry the Easton Assassin Holmes. In June of 1988, which many people see as Mike Tyson's peak performance, when he really hit his apex, his zenith as a fighter, and it was all downhill from there, was a KO in the 1st round against Michael Spinks. Now, we talk about lineage. Even though Mike Tyson won the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF heavyweight championships, Michael Spinks was really seen as the lineal heavyweight champion by virtue of his victories over Larry Holmes twice. He definitely beat Larry Holmes, clear decision victories. So again, by lineage, Spinks is seen, and even though Spinks was a former light heavyweight champion, moved up to the heavyweight ranks and took on the best fighter and beat him twice. So Spinks is the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. What we have stated, if you're the man who beat the man who beat the man, the term lineal, if you look into the word lineal, there's a word lining to it. Can you trace that line from the man who beat the man who definitely beat the man? In the case of that, Mike Tyson beat the hell out of the man in 1 round, and that pretty much was the peak of Mike Tyson. February of 1989, a TKO victory in the 5th round against Frank Bruno. In July of 1989, a TKO victory in the 1st round against Carl the Truth Williams. And as discussed, February of 1990, a KO in the 10th round against Buster Douglas, which is still seen by many as the biggest upset in heavyweight championship boxing history. Probably one of the biggest upsets ever in professional boxing, and one of the biggest upsets in sports history, as famously discussed ad nauseum on different documentaries. We did a review on that particular fight 30 years later. The 42-1 underdog, Buster Douglas, And even though the KO in the 10th round, you might say in the heavyweight division, it was lucky punch, it was a thorough thrashing by one Buster Douglas. June of 1990, in his first comeback fight, a KO in the first round against Henry Tillman. In December of 1990, a TKO in the first round against Alex Stewart. 2 tough fights against Donovan Razor Riddick, March of 1991, a controversial stoppage in the 7th round, and in June of 1991, a clear unanimous decision victory. Mike Tyson is imprisoned. Has a comeback fight against one Peter McNeely. Fight was DQ'd in the first round. December of 1995, a KO in the 3rd round against Buster Mathis. March of 1996, a TKO victory in the 3rd round in a rematch against Frank Bruno to win the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the World. A TKO in the 1st round against Bruce Seldon, September of 1996, the same night that the legendary rapper Tupac Shakur was shot. So he won a version of the Heavyweight Championship, which was the WBA. November of 1996, a TKO loss in the 11th round in another huge upset against Evander Holyfield, who was off of his loss the previous year against one Riddick Bowe, and we'll discuss him shortly. June of 1997, a DQ in the 3rd round against Evander Holyfield for biting his ears twice. January of 1999, a KO in the 5th round against Francois Botha. A no contest, October of 1999, against one Orlin Norris. Andrew Galata, October of 2000, when Galata pretty much walked out of the ring, but a fight was ruled a no contest because Mike failed a drug test. In October of 2001, against the Danish pacer, I believe was his name, Brian Nielsen, could not get out of his stool in the 6th round. In June of 2002, a KO loss to Lennox Lewis in a very dominating performance. We have discussed that fight ad nauseum as well. In February of 2003, a KO in the 1st round against one Clifford Etienne. July of 2004, a KO loss in the 4th round against Danny Williams. And in Mike Tyson's final fight, could not get off the stool against one Kevin McBride. Riddick Big Daddy Bowe fought at heavyweight, standing at 6 feet 5 inches with the 81-inch reach. Total fights 45, 43 wins, 33 big wins by knockout, 1 loss, and 1 no contest. We will pick up the career of one Riddick Bowe against the late Smoking Burt Cooper, October of 1990, a KO in the 2nd round. Tyrell Biggs, March of 1991, a TKO in the 8th round. Bruce Seldon, August of 1991, a KO in the 1st round. Elijah Tillery, October of 1991. And folks, go watch this, quote, fight when Elijah Tillery began kicking Riddick Bowe in the middle of the ring, and his former manager, Rock Newman, reaches over the top rope, pulls Elijah Tillery as Riddick Bowe was punching down. One of the most chaotic scenes ever in boxing history. December of 1991, in the rematch, a TKO in the 4th round against one Elijah Tillery. July of 1992, a TKO in the 7th round against Pierre Kutzer. In November of 1992, as some would say, this was Riddick Bowe's apex. This was his zenith, his absolute peak. A unanimous decision victory against Evander Holyfield in an absolute classic heavyweight fight. Folks, go back and watch that fight. I was a kid when this fight happened, and I remember this fight like it was yesterday. Ironically, for all the Holyfield naysayers who didn't believe in him as a champion, in this loss actually made a lot of believers out of the Holyfield detractors. So definitely a little bit of irony there. I mean, you just saw the fight building up round by round, and that 10th round, which is again one of the greatest rounds not only in heavyweight championship boxing history, but one of the greatest rounds in boxing history, period, regardless of weight class. I would definitely recommend go back and watch that fight. In his first title defense, February of 1993, a TKO victory in the 1st round against one Michael Dokes. Now let me go back to Evander Holyfield. We're talking about lineage, as we just discussed. Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. Evander Holyfield beats Buster Douglas. Riddick Bowe beats Evander Holyfield. So when you trace lineage, linear, line, the man who beat the man who beat the man. So now Riddick Bowe is the undisputed heavyweight champion, of the world. In May of 1993, a KO in the second round against one Jesse Ferguson. In November of 1993, only 1 year as a champion, loses to Evander Holyfield by majority decision. And that fight was another classic fight. I mean, again, these were some of the fights that really made us love boxing. And a classic fight. I thought Holyfield had his best tactical and strategic attack with the late, great Emanuel Stewart in this corner. We have discussed this before, where they made a bunch of tactical adjustments, and Holyfield fought a picture-perfect fight. I think Holyfield's performance is clearly taken away by the guy who was the late fan man who flew into the ring in the open Caesars Palace Arena, flies, crash lands onto the ring ropes and the ring apron. There was a 20-something minute delay. Riddick Bowe's wife fell out at ringside. So I think that tends to overshadow the absolute great performance by one Evander Holyfield. Some people might say that Bowe, who had gained 11 pounds, who really wasn't in tip-top shape, but you're the heavyweight champion of the world, you have to be in tip-top shape. So Bowe's only title reign lasted for a year, and it ended on that day. In December of 1994, a unanimous decision victory against one Larry Donald. That fight is notable because if you remember the press conference where Riddick Bowe just fired 2 punches on Larry Donald, I'm talking about just stole him. Bop, bop. I mean, just hit the man. I mean, cleaned his clock. And I think at that point, that took Larry Donald's soul. I had never seen it. I had never seen anything like that. And to just hit the man at the press conference, fire 2 punches on him and some hard punches. Clearly, Larry Donald fought, but you can tell that was kind of in his mind. March of 1995, a KO victory in the 6th round against one Herbie Hyde. June of 1995, a KO victory in the 6th round against Jorge Luis Gonzalez. In November of 1995, a TKO victory over Evander Holyfield in the 8th round. People have their reservations about that, but we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. And by reservations, the quality of the victory. July of 1996, a disqualification win against Andrew Golota, where anybody watching that fight would know that Bowe did not win that fight. He was getting beaten from pillar to post and quite frankly getting his ass kicked. But due to Andrew Golota's low blows, there was a disqualification. Same thing happened in the rematch. December of 1996, Bowe was getting a thorough thrashing. Andrew Golota, again, with victory easy in hand, decides to commit more low blow fouls and gets disqualified for a second consecutive fight. So and of course, Bowe came back years later, but really not. But we're talking about a peak Riddick Bowe. So let this sink in. Riddick Bowe won the heavyweight championship of the world in 1992. By December of 1996, he was done as a top professional. That is another fall from grace. Again, remembering Riddick Bowe, him and Holyfield, folks, let's really go back to the 1990s. People think of the 70s as perhaps the golden era of heavyweight boxing. Why? You had Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Joe Frazier, Ken Norton. That's just the top. We haven't even got into the Leon Spinks later on. I don't want to throw Leon Spinks in that category, so we'll stay with these guys. Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Norton. In the 1990s, even with Tyson being in prison, you still had Foreman, Holyfield, Michael Moore, Riddick Bowe, a young Lennox Lewis who wasn't there yet, and then always that figure in the room was one Mike Tyson. And in this 1990s, you had Evander Holyfield win the heavyweight championship of the world. You had Riddick Bowe win the heavyweight championship of the world. You had Michael Moore winning the heavyweight championship of the world. You had George Foreman winning the heavyweight championship of the world. And later on down the line, actually twice with, hell, you said like a few times with Holyfield. And at the end of the 1990s, Lennox Lewis became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. So the 1990s was truly a golden era in heavyweight boxing. And While we're going so deep with this, look at what the heavyweight division is now in boxing. So you've gone from the 70s, where again, a lot of people consider that the golden era. Ali, Foreman, Frazier, Norton. The 1980s, kind of, you had the end of Ali, you had the Larry Holmes era, Michael Spinks came up, a young Mike Tyson was running roughshod, but we think of those 1990s. The quality of fights that we had in the 1990s that are still talked about today, especially here on Chin Check Radio, and this is why you take the time out to listen to us, because we're going to educate you on how it was in the 1990s. Now let's go back into our fantasy matchup. Riddick Bowe versus Mike Tyson. You got to think to yourself, when those fights were made, or it could have happened, let's say in 92. Again, Mike was in prison from 92 to 95. Bowe had already had his fights with Holyfield. When Tyson gets out, he fights his nothing fights. And at this point, Bowe is not the same fighter. So for some reason, through bad timing, prison, declining skill set, not take care of oneself, that's what a fight, it never got made. It came close to, let's say, 1996, which is ironic because the Andrew Golota fights were seen as a keep busy fight for Riddick Bowe to stay in shape to hopefully one day land a Mike Tyson fight. Because people tend to forget this part. As a big of a star Mike Tyson was in the 1980s, he was actually a bigger star when he came out of prison. Mike Tyson was definitely the needle mover. He was the person that people paid to watch, whether it's paid because you want to see Mike Tyson knock people out or whether you want to see him lose. Even though Mike Tyson was very popular, but I think the 80s Mike Tyson was a very fan favorite fighter. They loved Mike. They loved the lisp and the innocence and the youth and the young heavyweight champion of the world. I think the 1990s Mike who came out, he was beloved. Still that love from the 1980s, but of course he wanted to take more of a bad guy approach. Both men facing each other. Their common opponents, especially we're talking about prime both guys, are Evander Holyfield and Andrew Golota. Now let's discuss Evander Holyfield. Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe had 3 classic fights. Riddick Bowe did win 2 out of 3 fights. So you have to take that into consideration. He did win 2 out of 3. The reason why I mentioned earlier why some people might want to give the third Evander Holyfield fight a side eye, because Evander Holyfield stated, well, at the time it was believed he had a heart condition. Evander Holyfield says it was more because he suffered from hepatitis. I'm going to say, well, he's one of either A or C, be bad seafood, and he wasn't at his peak in that third Bowe fight. However, he did score a knockdown of Riddick Bowe in that fight with a beautiful left hook. Obviously, you saw his energy start to wane. Bowe scores a TKO. So, common opponents. And then, the very next year, almost exactly a year later, Evander Holyfield then beats Mike Tyson in a huge upset. So, Riddick Bowe scoring 2 out of 3 fights against Evander Holyfield. Evander Holyfield then beating Mike Tyson 2 times. Now, one might say, well, what do we know what would have happened in the second fight? We can pretty much bank on, I think Holyfield would have beaten Mike again. Now, some people might say, well, that's why Mike bit him. We only can deal with what we have. I think Holyfield just was not afraid of Mike, and I think Holyfield definitely would have beaten Mike twice. So, Bowe has 2 out of 3 over Holyfield. Holyfield has 2 fights over Mike Tyson. Now, what's funny, Andrew Golota has officially 2 losses against Riddick Bowe, but anybody watching the fights know that Golota beat the hell out of Bowe twice. Mike Tyson made Andrew Golota quit. So is that really a good gauge on how to measure the guys? For some of you listening, you might say, Chin Check, I have everything that I need to know in order to make a decision. But we're gonna look at this like a little bit deeper. Both guys were from Brooklyn, New York. Brownsville to be exact. A lot of Mike Tyson's mystique and aura was the intimidation that he had on like a lot of his opponents. We can pretty much bank on that Riddick Bowe was not going to be afraid of one Mike Tyson. We can pretty much bank on that. Again, coming from the same neighborhood, that same Brooklyn attitude, that same Brooklyn mindset, I don't think intimidation would have been there for one Riddick Bowe. So that kind of takes one advantage that Mike Tyson would have had going into the ring. I think both fighters are good. Both fighters are strong. A lot of people tend to forget Mike Tyson, and as we discussed this before, went the distance with the James Quick Tillises of the world. Went the distance with Bone Crusher Smith and Tony TNT Tucker. We can say that Riddick Bowe was a better fighter than all of those guys. Despite Riddick Bowe's laziness, and that's the reason why his run at the top of his prime years, it didn't last long, because he did not take care of himself. He gained weight in between fights. He wasn't always in tip-top shape. Again, the peak Riddick Bowe was that first fight versus Evander Holyfield. Now, if you look at Riddick Bowe's skill set, Riddick Bowe was, again, 6 foot 5 inches in height, so he has a height advantage over Mike as well as a reach advantage over Mike. And that would have given Mike a lot of problem, because Bowe, his size, I think his jab would have kept Mike at bay. Bowe had a great right hand as well as a solid uppercut. Mike possessed a solid uppercut, but Mike would have to get inside of those punches to really try to do his damage. And again, I think Bowe would have roughed him up on the inside. Again, Bowe was from the street too. Because you can look at the Lennox Lewis fight, even though it was an older Mike Tyson, but what would have happened if Mike Tyson fought a guy with a good jab and a good uppercut? Now, the thing that Lennox Lewis had over Riddick Bowe was that Lewis had a picture-perfect right hand. I mean, right hand, just straight, beautiful, one of the best right hands you ever see. Bowe never really developed a straight right hand. He threw more of a winging, overarching right hand. But I think Bowe's other skill sets, his jab, because Bowe had abilities to fight from the outside as well as throw a beautiful uppercut on the inside. See the first Evander Holyfield fight in the 10th round when he hurt Holyfield by an uppercut. And of course, Mike would have to come in, and now that's leaving Mike open to getting hit. For Mike to do his damage, he would have to be inside due to his smaller height as well as shorter reach, and that's why I think will play in the Riddick Bowe's hands, especially landing uppercuts. Both guys have tremendous chins. I mean, like, let's just say this. Even in the Galata fights where Bowe was being beaten up, and again, even that second fight, he literally was a shell of himself. So let's go to the third Evander Holyfield fight. A beautiful left hook dropped. Mike Tyson, even though he has a knockout losses against Buster Douglas, against Evander Holyfield, but Mike was beaten up a lot. So Mike has definitely a solid chin, where his knockout losses were a direct result of just a sustained beating, not from a quote one-punch heavyweight knockout. So both guys have great chins. I think a lot of leather would have landed, a lot of bombs would have landed. I think it would have slugged every now and again. But we at Chin Check Radio, in a fantasy matchup between Riddick Big Daddy Bowe and Iron Mike Tyson, we would choose, and it will shock a lot of you. We love Mike Tyson, but just based on everything we just said, the intimidation factor, well, the non-intimidation factor, both being from Brooklyn, Bowe's height, 6'5" versus 5'10", an 80-something in reach versus a 70-something in reach. Mike going the distance with lesser fighters, even in his prime, against Riddick Bowe, who is actually a better fighter than all of them. Even though Bowe lacked work ethic, lacked discipline, lacked dedication, and lacked desire, he had skills. You can say, well, wouldn't that put Bowe at a disadvantage for Mike? Well, Mike Tyson has a history of not being in shape and not being 100%. See the Buster Douglas fight. Again, you can say Buster Mama died, and we're not saying that didn't have an impact on him, but even Mike's trainer, Ken Bruni, said, I took one look at Mike and knew that he definitely wasn't in tip-top shape. So both men have shown a history of not being 100% ready to fight. Both men have shown a history of not taking an opponent seriously and then becoming a serious opponent. So now this goes into stylistically, how does a fight match up? And we pick Riddick Bowe based on being one of the best big men, those early big men with a good jab, solid right hand, a beautiful uppercut, great boxer, was on the 1988 Olympic boxing team, who won the silver medal. So this is a guy who has the amateur pedigree, who has the skill set, he doesn't have the work ethic. So based on those factors, Bowe not being intimidated by Mike Tyson, Bowe's height, Bowe's reach, Bowe's boxing skills, we feel that Riddick Bowe would win a clear unanimous decision victory over Mike Tyson. Mike would win his rounds, but we expect Bowe, a prime Mike. We would definitely pick Riddick Bowe to defeat Mike Tyson by a clear unanimous decision victory in our Chin Check Radio referee, our fantasy warfare. Please let us know what you think. This is one of the few times that we will ask you all to leave comments in the comment section. But again, we choose Riddick Bowe in a fantasy matchup over One Iron Mike Tyson, which brings us to the conclusion of this particular broadcast. Chin Check Radio signing out.